Welcome back, Patriots, to another episode of the Ball Brad Show. It is Tuesday, March 5th, and Joe Biden, good old Joey, is still the worst president in American history. Patriots, it's great to be back with you on this fine Tuesday morning. And while I was doing a little bit of show prep, I stumbled across this gem of a video right here, where these two knuckleheads were laying into Trump because he made one gaffe over the weekend, confusing Biden for Obama, and then they go on to talk about how unfit Trump is and start bragging about how fit and coherent Biden is. It's wild, but let's watch it.
As an incumbent, that would weigh on me. You know, Barack Obama was getting in the 90s in primary contests. Joe Biden, look what Joe Biden's doing. Joe Biden's doing exceptionally well in primary contests. So it does. All of this has to be weighing on him. Plus 8-9 years of age, all this weighing on him, and he's not healthy. You look at Joe Biden. He exercises every day. You look how fit and trim he is. People are obsessed with how he walks.
His doctor told us why that happens.
Yeah,
and that's a condition he's had for a while.
Yeah,
tingling in his feet, but also he has a stutter, and he's had it for decades.
Yeah.
He's had it for decades. Everything that he is doing, he has done. That's been baked into.
It's all a stutter problem, folks. None of this has to do with his cognition levels at a massive decline, him losing his train of thought, him looking for dead people, him conversing with dead people, taking photos with nobody that's ever been at that event in the first place. All of that has to do with the stutter problem and the tingling in his feet, you guys.
To the Biden situation that we have known for years. And while he is older and he should own that, and he should joke about it, and he should address it, I think we're at a point now where for Trumpers on Fox News, for the MAGA right, for Donald Trump himself, they're at an inflection point for making fun of Joe Biden's age, for making it an issue. But it's actually coming back to haunt them in a really big way.
It is.
As Donald Trump gets on stage time and time again and has these weird moments.
What weird moments are you talking about? And we're not at an inflection point. The guy has multiple gaffes every single day. It's amazing when Donald Trump has one gaffe, and that's the definition of what a gaffe is, where it's just kind of a one-off. It happens every now and then. Hell, it's going to happen to anybody and everybody. But Joe Biden, it's more than a gaffe. It's more than a stuttering problem. We're all aware of it. But as we expected, the media is going to rub the shoulders of whoever's running for the Democrat Party, and it just so happens to be Joe Biden. Once it's Michelle Obama, because Joe's probably going to drop out in March or April, then it's going to be her, and they're going to rub the shoulders of the Obamas once again and all these other things. So, wild video, just want to bring it to your attention. Couldn't believe that Joe Scarborough on Morning Joe is still spewing a bunch of nonsense. Well, big win here, and our lead story is Donald Trump winning bigly in the Supreme Court. A shutout, folks. 9-0. Siding with the former president. We got some reactions here from legal experts, and they're pouring in after the Supreme Court voted unanimously in favor of former President Donald Trump. I won big. Who wants to win here? Winning it. We're gonna win so much. We're gonna get tired of winning. And against the effort to remove him from the Colorado ballot for allegedly taking part in an insurrection. Now, they're calling him an insurrectionist, but he's never been found guilty of being an insurrectionist. And so it was nice to see that the court actually sided with something that seemed so obvious, but there was a little bit of fear being instilled, in all of us, because the court has some lefties in it, but it just shows you how far left some of these states have gotten, like Colorado, New York City, California, where they're going as far as trying to remove somebody from the ballot, all because they don't like the guy. Well, it says here the court showed a divided nation that we remain bound by shared constitutional values. This comes from George Washington law professor Jonathan Turley, stating on Fox News immediately after the decision was read, adding that this was a critical moment for this court in history. And I tend to actually agree with that statement. It's nice to see that we're still in unison on our founding documents that holds this republic together. There has to be some sort of standard. The tough thing is there's not too many decisions that have been predicated talking about, well, what does the 14th Amendment really mean? And I think that they got this one right. Whether it was siding with me or not, I really do believe that they got this right, that it should have been handled at a federal level and not a state level, since it's talking about federal officials. After all these years we've spent in this republic, we came to a point where these states claimed that they could unilaterally bar the leading presidential candidate rather, from ballots to prevent people from voting for Donald Trump, which is insane to think about. The court here struck with a strong and it appears to be unanimous voice at least one of the results that that's not going to happen. Voters will vote. They'll make their own verdict regardless of cases that happen involving President Trump. They will cast the most important verdict of all. They will vote for the next president of the United States. Let the people decide. I don't know why state officials are jumping in like this, like we saw from Colorado and other states, trying to remove this man from the ballot. If the people of that state don't want him to be president, allow them to show up at the polls and elect him not to be president if that's what their choosing is. So much for the long list of people who weighed in on this case to declare that Colorado's position was only a constitutionally acceptable one, and suggesting that any idiot could see that. That comes from Judicial Network President Carrie Cervino. You also hear, obviously, they were not making legal arguments, but political ones. You have Illa Shapiro, Director of Constitutional Studies at the Manhattan Institute, told Fox News Digital that the United Supreme Court got it right. So, but left are still going to come out in droves saying that they got it wrong. How could an insurrectionist be allowed to be on the ballot and all these things? Well, it was a bunch of hubbub. It actually goes on further and states cannot create a patchwork of ways for disqualifying candidates from federal office, which is kind of what I was explaining. Again, federal office, not state office. There's disagreement among the justices about which federal actors can do so and according to which produces. So perhaps it could be a good idea for Congress to clarify these issues by enacting a new version of the Enforcement Act of 1870. Hey, maybe there's some truth to that. But again, it wasn't about the Enforcement Act of 1870 to be specific. It was more so, hey, how does a state level actually supersede a federal level in terms of the 14th Amendment? And again, why are you as a state getting to decide if somebody can run for office at a federal level or not? Never made really sense to much people. Hell, you don't have to be a constitutional, expert on that to kind of grab your head around that one. Well, you also have here this this lady, the Colorado Secretary of State, says she's disappointed by the Supreme Court's decision. It would be up to the American voters to save our democracy in November. So here we go with the theatrics. Once again, let's roll it.
My larger reaction is disappointment. I do believe that states should be able, under our Constitution, to bar oath-breaking insurrectionists. And ultimately, this decision leaves open the door for Congress to act to pass authorizing legislation. But we know that Congress is a nearly non-functioning body. So ultimately, it will be up to the American voters to save our democracy in November. My larger reaction.
Here's the threat, folks. This is kind of echoed by Charlie Chester of CNN that was ultimately removed. He was the technical director over there. Kind of saying, hey, after all this stuff takes place of COVID, then all the threats and fear mongering are going to start. We talk about it a little bit in my book, Trojan Horse, How the Left is Destroying America. And this is what you see here from the left. They're going to sit here, try to remove Donald Trump off the ballot because, let's face it, they don't like him. And she's going to say, well, insurrectionists shouldn't be able to run. Again, Donald Trump was never found guilty of insurrection. And does anybody else get the kind of the freaky vibe from this lady? Like, she doesn't really blink that much, kind of creepy in this video, kind of the one that reigns supreme, wants the power all in her hand to decide who you can and cannot vote for. Because that's the vibe that I'm getting from her, and I ain't liking it at all. But here you go, folks. The threat, our democracy's in danger because Donald Trump's running and you get to vote for him. If anything, that sounds like a democracy, to allow people to vote who they want. A threat to democracy would be, hey, you know what? Harvesting ballots, not taking actually into account our election integrity and removing the fraud, which a lot of Republicans want, whether that sways for Donald Trump or Joe Biden, doesn't matter. How about all those things being a threat to democracy? Because that actually hinders people's voting and their rights that were instilled and enshrined through them through our Constitution. But no, it's fine. Donald Trump's a threat to democracy, which is wild, just a wild statement. But Joe Biden isn't. Amidst everything that's been going on, he's not a threat to democracy, but Donald Trump somehow is. Well, speaking of other threats to democracy, well, you got AG Garland here, calls voter ID laws unnecessary. Oh. So let's see this one. I actually haven't even read it, but there's going to be some gems in here. Speaking on Sunday in Alabama, Attorney General Merrick Garland decried efforts by states to implement voter ID requirements as discriminatory, burdensome, and unnecessary. I don't understand. I never understood this argument about having a voter ID so that the person's voting can actually give credibility of who they are so we don't have voter fraud taking place. I don't want somebody voting on my behalf. I want to show up. And even though if they don't request the ID from me, I still say, hey, is it okay if I show you my ID? Because I want to give proof of who I am so some knucklehead doesn't come in and try to vote on my behalf. Garland spoke at the event at the Tabernacle Baptist Church to commemorate the 59th anniversary of Selma police officers attacking demonstrators in the civil rights movement. Quote, there are many things that are open to debate in America. One thing that must not be open for debate is the right for all eligible citizens to vote and to have their vote counted. Garland did not define what he meant by eligible. Of course he didn't, because it's easy to throw out vague terms. Institutional racism. Well, be specific. Who in those institutions are racist so we can get rid of them because nobody likes racism? They can't do it. After citing the history of black people being denied voting rights, he claimed, quote, court decisions in recent years have drastically weakened the protections of the Voting Rights Act that marchers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge bled for 59 years ago. And since those decisions, there has been a dramatic increase in legislative measures that make it harder for millions of eligible voters to vote and to elect their representative of their choice office. And I really do mean this as a kind of a heartfelt question, like a serious question. How is it not racist, the fact that he's constantly, him and also the Democrat Party, making the case that black people can't get voter IDs or just IDs in general? Like, hand to God, I don't know a single black person that doesn't have an ID. Like, why can't they go get their IDs? Like, what is stopping? I mean, it's not just black people, it's just anybody in general. Like, what's stopping them from going down to the DMV, which I understand nobody wants to go down to, but what's stopping them from going to the Department of Motor Vehicle and just getting their ID? I've always been baffled by that. Isn't that like a racist argument to say that black people can't go down to the DMV and get their IDs? So I don't know what's stopping people from voting. From my understanding, it's not stopping anybody from voting. And to correlate that to what happened in our past with black people, I think is absolutely insane. Because some of the things that black people had to go through were resoundingly, obviously wrong. And of course they have the right to vote. But the question isn't as much as it is the right to vote, as it is, hey, are you who you say you are? Because there's dead people voting, which we've all seen. And we just want to eliminate that fraud. Again, if that hinders people from voting Republican or Democrat, that is what it is. You should have followed the rules. Go get an ID so that you have the right to vote and people can actually verify who you say you are, because we did the poll all but like 2 weeks ago when it came out in the 2020 election. 21% of people were voting for somebody from like an unregistered location, voting for Biden or Trump. You also had 21% voting on behalf of somebody else. This is all voter fraud, by the way. 21%, almost a quarter of voters are fraudulently making their votes eligible in whichever election. And it's still not under control, by the way. So anytime you bring up voter ID laws, it's going to hinder black people, Hispanics, whites. It hinders somebody. And it's all going to be implemented here as being discriminatory. It's burdensome and unnecessary restrictions. It's just insane. It's a wild argument. I never understood it. And it's a racist argument, in my opinion, because I think black people are eligible to do anything and everything that white people can do, Asian people can do, Hispanic. Look, we're all equal under the Constitution, which is what the founders wanted, but the left doesn't think that way. I don't know why. It's random. I'm not saying discriminatory behavior doesn't happen. I'm not saying burdensome behavior doesn't happen. Obviously it does, but I don't think it's a massive issue here in the United States. Well, speaking of something that is an issue, that's illegal immigration. You have a former Border Patrol chief blasting Biden and Harris for never meeting with him, which is an astonishing statement because we're constantly told that the Biden-Harris administration is doing everything they can. At least that's what's coming from Republicans. And then Democrats are just silent about this whole matter. Like just average Americans, just like you and I, are predominantly just completely quiet. Remember when Donald Trump was down at the border, Democrats were losing their ish every which way. You're racist, you're bigots, you're sexist, you're homophobes. You have way more problems taking place at the southern border. People being locked up in cages. They're being still separated from families. You have children dying at the border, sex trafficking, drug trafficking, all this stuff taking place. Not a peep from our friends over on the other side of the aisle. Democrats are like, or Republicans are like, hey, we want to get this under control because a lot of terrible things are happening to people at the southern border. You can't do it because you're racist, you're sexist, you're bigot, homophobes. That's Republicans and that's Democrats. Well, former U.S. Border Patrol chief here, Raul Ortiz, slammed President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris in an interview that aired on Sunday night, saying that they never met with him while he served in the position until he retired last year. And the reason why this is a big deal is because Kamala Harris was put in charge of the border. She was called the border czar. You know, that time when she flew over the border to South America to talk about the weather conditions there for climate change? She handed out cookies with her face on it. It sounds so preposterous when I say it out loud. It was a real thing. We covered it. So they're going to say, hey, we've been worried about this issue since day one. This comes from not Kamala Harris, Karine Jean-Pierre on the podium. It also came from Jen Psaki. Since day one, Joe Biden put forward a comprehensive legislation to deal with illegal immigration. But he hasn't done anything since then. So that's all you have to do nowadays, I guess, as president. It's just day one of office. Just say and do a bunch of things, regardless of the outcome, whether it makes things worse or makes things better. Just the fact that you just put it out there in the ether. Hey, you know what? Problem solved. We figured it out. We take the issue seriously. Nobody wanted to take it up in Congress, even though we had all three branches of government for like the first year and a half, 2 years. Not a big deal, but we care a lot about this whole issue. We care so much that we actually didn't even think it was necessary to talk to the Border Patrol chief. Makes all sense. Makes a ton of sense why everything went south real quick. His remarks on CBS News 60 Minutes came after approximately 8 million illegal aliens, a number greater than the population of the majority of U.S. states. It's greater than 36 of our states, for that fact, have entered the U.S. under the Biden administration, the most significant increase in illegal immigration in the country's history. And that's a global thing as well. I mean, he's shattering records that no other countries have ever seen either. But, hey, it is what it is. When agencies are making a decision based upon politics or whether they're going to get media coverage, hey, we're going to put it all personal in the 2-mile stretch, he said. What about the other 200 miles? So I think he's kind of talking about when Biden went to Brownsville, was it Brownsville, Texas or whatever, where they saw like 17 illegal aliens in their entire time. Like nobody's ever seen an illegal alien there. But then there's El Paso and all these other areas that Donald Trump went to that's seeing like 10,000 plus people a day, which is where the issue's at. That's probably where you should have gone. But, it's a lot easier to go where there's nobody at. Quote, I've never had one conversation with the president, he said, which is insane. Or the vice president for that matter. And so I was the chief of the Border Patrol. I commanded 21,000 people. That's a problem. I 100% agree, my dude. Why his phone calls weren't made? I was told he went to the border. He never even talked to the border chief there. Who was the border chief when he went down there? Did he talk to him? So all this is taking place. You have somebody being told that they're taking it seriously, and they're not. They're not taking it serious at all. And like I've always said, look, if he wanted to figure things out, you guys, he would have done it. He can do it. He has. When I say by the snap of his fingers, he literally could do it through executive action, through executive order. He's not going to. Well, some other wild news here. You got the ATF director displays ignorance about basic firearm topics during pro-gun control segment, which is just, it's so wild that these people are put in positions and they know nothing about it. It sounds so reminiscent of Hunter Biden being put on the board of Burisma, a natural gas company in Ukraine, and knows nothing about natural gas. In the same way here, you have ATF director Stephen, was that Bettelbach or whatever the heck his name is, who's a Democrat. Look, Democrats typically want stricter gun laws. Democrats typically want to limit your Second Amendment right. It's not Republicans that are limiting your Second Amendment right. It's not them putting through legislation. It's not conservatives. Hell, it's not even independents. There's a specific party. It's the Democrat Party that's consistently, for decades, chiseling away at your Second Amendment right. So it's no shock here that the ATF director is a Democrat and made numerous mistakes when speaking about firearms during an interview that aired over the weekend. So, speaking on CBS News, Face the Nation, this dude stood in front of a table that had numerous firearms as he tried what he claimed were loopholes that allow people to get around gun laws, which you just keep hitting your head against the wall. It doesn't work that way. They're blowing smoke. They literally lie, which is why I want to break this down. While speaking about how many rounds some of the AK variant rifles could fire, this dude demonstrated that he did not know basic firearm terminology, like the difference between a clip and a magazine. Moments later, he also demonstrated that he did not know what a pistol brace was when he suggested that it was the same thing as a buttstock. It's tiresome, you guys. It's tiresome. These are the people running the show. They don't know anything. Pistol braces allow the person operating the firearm to stick their wrist through the device and use a piece of Velcro to tighten the device around the wrist, thus allowing the operator to fire the weapon only using one hand. The way the Brennan conducted the interview made it clear that the segment was intended to be pro-gun control propaganda as she stood with her arms crossed, expressing disgust and promoting the false narrative that the Second Amendment was created for hunting, which is an exhausting argument. Exhausting. Truthful, one of my favorite teachers in high school was my government teacher. I love the guy, hardcore Democrat, told us the exact same thing. Obviously, it was wrong. I knew it was wrong because, heck, I was conservative Republican. But I didn't hound the guy for it, but it's such a misnomer that it's for hunting. It's so exhausting. The Second Amendment was created for the purpose of self-defense and a check against a government that can go tyrannical, whether that's foreign or abroad or even, heck, domestic. And again, I always like to use this argument of the fact that we are an extreme outlier, not just an outlier, an extreme outlier when it comes to republics and democracies, that we're getting to the point where you're more likely to actually have a republic fall than to stand. And so at some point, you're going to expect that there's so many laws in the books, our rights have been chiseled away so much that you're not even going to have them anymore. And so the hope is that at some point, when they're chiseled away so much that you still at least have a inkling of that, where you can stand up for the rights that were given by, God himself. But this whole thing here is leading to some propaganda where people buy into this narrative. And when they buy this narrative, they are more than happy to forfeit their rights and ultimately forfeit the rights of their American citizens, their fellow brothers and sisters in this country, which is always mind-blowing to me. This dude also urged gun stores to refuse to sell certain types of weapons. What? Folks, they're out there. They're not with us, okay? They're not with us here. Just switch it out for any other product and go tell a business not to sell it. Like large caliber rifles to customers who are paying in cash and to pick up the phone and call the ATF so they can go investigate those people. Jesus. Cool. And for those who aren't doing that, I hope and expect that as Americans, we will do that. But for those who aren't, somebody comes into your store in a border state and plunks down $12,000 cash money for one of those 50 caliber rifles so that there's no credit card trail. I mean, my word, we hope that people will help us as Americans and continue to help us and not make the sale and protect our safety. Folks, this is the same ATF under the Obama administration in the Fast and Furious case that gave the cartel firearms in the hopes that after the crime has already been committed, meaning people were murdered, that they can then go apprehend those cartels and trace the weapon, the firearm sales, back to these distributors. I know it sounds insane, but it happened. Yeah. Under the Obama administration, they gave violent cartels guns. And after they committed the crime, then they wanted to sit there and trace the weapons back. That's the same ATF. And it's even worse that this dude doesn't even know anything about firearms. Well, I'm just sort of doing a little bit of a commercial here. For those who are going to be at the counter thinking about it, don't let this happen. Please help us to stop this. We respect you. We depend on you. Please, as firearm dealers, help us stop this. So it's over the top. It's so silly. And it is propaganda. And the sad thing is there's going to be a lot of Americans that are buying into this whole thing and being led astray by this knucklehead who, doesn't have his head on straight. But, this is the type of stuff you get from a certain party that constantly wants to limit your rights. And as I've always said, it's not that as if this right's going to be disappearing tomorrow or even 5 years from now. But the more that you start chiseling away at those rights, there's going to be a point where that right is no longer there. And the second that you don't have that Second Amendment right, just be aware that all the other rights are going to disappear. Because at the end of the day, we are a republic. We are an extreme outlier. And there's no other republic or democracy that's ever lasted anywhere near us. We are an experiment. And the hope is that the experiment continues because we are the last city on that shining hill, folks. We are that city on the shining hill. And there's a reason why millions of people want to pour into our country because, damn, we are the best country that God has ever created, folks. And we need to turn this ship around so that we have retirement, so that we can figure out our deficit, so that we're not $34 trillion in debt, so that we're not in all these foreign wars, so that there can be peace on earth here, baby. And that hopefully the United States of America can be back on the top. Well, folks, that is today's episode. As I've mentioned, I think we're going to end up moving this hour-long podcast, 30-minute podcast, however long it's going to be, to memberships only, a memberships only podcast. And then we'll put a sprinkling of videos throughout the day for those that don't want to pay for the podcast. But I mean, you're talking $2 a month. I understand anytime you're asking for money, especially in Bidenomics, things are difficult. So I'm trying not to make it extremely expensive. I understand it's not for everybody, and please don't feel like you have to do it. But if you're part of the memberships and you understand why I'm doing this, it's to protect myself and the things that I say, as well as the things that I do. That if somebody really wants to know my opinions and the things that I say and do, then they have to pay for it. They have to go behind a paywall and actually go out of their way to hear those types of things. Where I'm still going to give commentary through other videos throughout the day. Those are going to be small videos, 5 to 15 minutes max in length. They'll be reacting to Jackie Heinrich of Fox News or Peter Doocy, or going over, AI or electric vehicles, the deficit, all sorts of stuff, the economy. So there's going to be little videos spread out through the day that you can catch. But if you want the hour-long podcast, probably starting next week, we're going to move to memberships only. Again, it's probably going to be about $2 a month. Please don't feel like I'm belittling that amount. I understand things are tight for a lot of people. Feel like you don't have to do it, but that's most likely where it's going to head. So with that being said, folks, be on the lookout for that. I'll make sure I put an announcement out there. And most likely today, if I could fit it in, I'm going to try to go live during the Super Tuesday stuff, and then probably going live for the State of the Union address, because we got to see if Joe Biden falls asleep during mid-sentence. So with that being said, hit that like and subscribe button. Leave us a short, sweet comment down below. It does help support the channel. And folks, I'll see you tomorrow here on The Ball Bragg Show.